Prepare yourself for 6 of the most harrowing stories of bear attacks ever told, where sudden charges, desperate fights for survival, and tragic encounters unfold deep in the wilderness. From a grizzly tearing through an ambulance to a lone hiker's brutal struggle, these intense tales reveal just how fast a calm moment in nature can turn into a deadly nightmare. In this video, we'll dive into these chilling accounts of bear attacks on humans, showcasing the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters. The morning air was bitterly cold in the isolated village, nestled deep within the Russian taiga, where frost-bitten wooden houses stood as silent witnesses to the harshness of life in a place where survival depended on both skill and luck. On that quiet day, paramedic Pavel Nikitin, a sturdy man with 10 years of field experience who had faced countless emergencies, was leading a small rescue team. Their mission: to save Galina Mirova, an elderly woman in her 70s who had suffered a severe heart attack during the night and now lay pale and barely breathing inside the rear of an ambulance parked on a muddy path just beyond the village's last row of cabins. Beside her, a slender but tough nurse known in the village for fearless dedication checked Galina's pulse, while a young volunteer, a wiry 18-year-old eager to prove himself, hovered anxiously with a thermal blanket. The driver, a broad-shouldered man hardened by years of navigating brutal Siberian winters, kept the engine idling as he scanned the snowy forest edge for signs of trouble. His mind remained focused on getting the patient to a hospital before her condition deteriorated beyond saving. Unbeknownst to the team, just 100 meters from their position, a massive Russian grizzly bear, scarred and limping from a gunshot wound inflicted by poachers days earlier, staggered through the frost-rimmed underbrush. Its senses were clouded by rage and pain. The scent of blood and the sounds of urgent human activity cut through its haze, igniting a violent instinct. Its muscles tensed beneath matted fur as it lowered its head and began to charge directly at the source of the noise, the white ambulance with flashing lights reflecting off icy branches. The bear's movement was swift and unstoppable. Massive paws pounded across the frozen ground with terrifying speed, its eyes locked onto the open rear doors, where light spilled out into the dark forest like a beacon. Inside the ambulance, the medical staff were oblivious to the approaching danger. The quiet urgency of their task gave way in an instant. A sudden, colossal force smashed into the rear doors, flinging them open with a metallic screech. The grizzly's bulk filled the opening, claws already slashing through the narrow confines of the vehicle as it lunged inside with a guttural roar. The nurse threw herself protectively over the patient, but the bear's claws raked her back with devastating power, tearing through coat and flesh in a single motion. The young volunteer tried to escape, but the bear's massive head swung toward him. Its jaws clamped down on his shoulder and shook him violently, the cramped space amplifying every sickening sound of tearing fabric and bone. The stench of blood quickly overpowered the sterile smell of antiseptic. The interior became a maelstrom of thrashing limbs, sprays of crimson, and muffled gasps for breath. The elderly woman's eyes fluttered open momentarily, reflecting pure terror just before the bear's claws ended her life within seconds. The nurse's attempts to resist were futile. Her arms struck blindly at the bear's thick hide before she collapsed, blood pooling on the floor. The young volunteer's struggles weakened as the bear's jaws crushed his collarbone, his body convulsing in spasms before falling still atop the gurney meant to save a life, not become a scene of horror. From the driver's seat, the man behind the wheel watched the unfolding nightmare through the small rear-view window. He froze as the back of the ambulance rocked violently, screams mingling with the bear's growls and the clang of medical equipment scattering across the floor. Snapping out of his paralysis, he slammed his fist into the gear shift, but his eyes darted to the open doors. Escape in that moment was impossible. Summoning every ounce of courage, he threw open his door and sprinted around the vehicle, his boots slipping in the icy ruts. With a surge of desperate strength, he slammed the rear doors shut against the bear's bulk. The creature thrashed, claws slashing at the metal and denting it inward. Blood, none of it his, slicked his hands as he wrestled the door latch into place. He jumped back into the driver's seat and floored the accelerator. Tires spun before catching on the frozen ground, and the ambulance lurched forward. The bear, still partly entangled in the doorway, was thrown backward by the motion, slamming onto the hard earth with a roar that echoed through the trees. As the vehicle bounced down the narrow track, the rear doors rattled, but held. Inside, a chilling silence settled, broken only by the driver's ragged breathing and the faint crackle of static from the dying radio. What began as a mission of mercy had turned into a mobile tomb, carrying 3 lifeless bodies and 1 man shell-shocked by horror. As the ambulance emerged onto the village's outskirts, neighbors stepped out, drawn by the engine's roar and the fading chaos. Some villagers caught glimpses of the injured bear staggering back into the woods, its fur soaked with blood as it disappeared into shadow. A trail of crimson marked its passage across the snow, silently telling a tale of unimaginable violence. A few brave souls ran to the ambulance as the driver stumbled out and collapsed to his knees, hands trembling, unable to speak of what he had witnessed inside. Others cautiously opened the rear doors and immediately recoiled, confronted by a scene that defied words. The ambulance, meant to be a sanctuary of healing, had been transformed into a chamber of horror. Blood streaked the walls, medical supplies lay strewn about, and the fallen lay motionless in the cold glow of the overhead light. Local authorities arrived hours later, piecing together a timeline from the driver's incoherent account and the evidence inside. They concluded that the bear had attacked in under 2 minutes, just long enough to turn a rescue into a massacre. Tracks around the site, along with evidence of poaching activity nearby, led investigators to determine that the bear's aggression had likely been driven by injury, pain, and fear. In the aftermath, the village was left stunned. The tragedy left deep emotional scars, especially among those who had seen the aftermath firsthand. Residents gathered in silence at makeshift memorials, struggling to comprehend how such devastation could unfold so quickly and without warning. The ambulance remained parked for days, roped off by local officials, until it was finally towed away under the veil of night. Too painful a sight for those who had known the victims. Though the bear was never found, its legacy lingered. The villagers learned a harsh truth that winter. In the vast and indifferent wilderness, even those who dedicate their lives to saving others can fall victim in an instant, swept away by the unforgiving hand of nature when least expected. Mark Jensen had been hunting since he was 12, a seasoned tracker who knew every trail and shadow in the forests near an island off the Alaskan coast, where towering spruces loomed like silent guardians over the rugged wilderness. At 42, his weathered face bore the marks of countless nights spent stalking elk and caribou, but he had never faced a creature that left him as uneasy as the massive bear that had recently begun raiding cabins near a river bend. This particular animal had torn doors from hinges, shredded food supplies, and left enormous claw marks along cabin walls, a sign of its boldness and size. Terrified locals pleaded with Mark to find and stop the bear before it turned its attention to people, for a bear that lost its fear of humans could become a nightmare stalking the village. On the gray dawn of his 4th day tracking the animal, Mark crouched at the riverbank, mist rising in ghostly columns from the cold water as he examined fresh tracks pressed deep into the mud. Each print was larger than a dinner plate, with claws carving grooves in the earth. The depth of the impressions suggested a creature weighing well over 1,000 pounds. His breath fogged in the morning air as he raised his head, eyes scanning the dense brush across the river, where flickers of movement stirred between tangled branches. His heart pounded with a mixture of adrenaline and dread as he spotted the bear's hulking form emerging from the trees, its brown fur matted with old blood and mud, eyes wild and unfocused. Before he could fully raise his rifle, the bear launched into a charge with shocking speed that defied its immense size. Each stride sent water and mud skyward as it crossed the shallows in a blur of fury. Mark managed to fire, The first shot struck the bear in the shoulder with a dull impact, but the animal barely flinched. He fired again and again. 4 more rounds hit the creature's chest and side, but it only roared louder, foam spraying from its jaws as it closed the distance in terrifying seconds. A massive paw swipe knocked Mark sideways into the wet grass, his rifle nearly torn from his hands as claws slashed through his coat and grazed his ribs, pain flaring through his side. He rolled frantically as the bear loomed over him, its paw crashing down where his head had been moments before. Dirt sprayed with each impact as Mark scrambled to regain his weapon. He brought up the rifle just in time to fire 2 more rounds into the bear's face. The impacts jolted its head back, but failed to halt its attack. A powerful blow knocked him backward again, his head striking a mossy log. Darkness swam at the edges of his vision as he gasped for breath, fighting to stay conscious, knowing that to lose focus now meant death beneath the relentless force of claws and teeth. Summoning his last reserves of strength, Mark emptied the rest of his magazine in a desperate barrage. Each shot cracked like thunder through the forest, bullets driving into the bear's chest, neck, and shoulders. The beast staggered, blood spraying from multiple wounds as it let out a deafening roar that rattled Mark to his core. Yet it kept moving, swiping wildly, claws carving into the ground just inches from his boots. With his rifle empty, he flung himself sideways to dodge a final lunge, landing hard on his side as pain tore through his battered frame. The bear's momentum carried it several feet past him before it collapsed on its side, its breathing ragged and shallow. Mark lay frozen in the grass, unable to process the moment through the haze of pain and terror. His ears rang from the gunfire, his heart thudded with relentless force. Time slowed as he watched the bear's chest rise and fall with weakening shudders, until at last, the animal's eyes dulled and its breathing stopped. Silence returned to the forest, pressing down like a heavy shroud. Blood from his wounds mixed with the mud beneath him as he forced himself to his knees. Every motion sent sharp jolts of pain through his body. His hands trembled as he reloaded his rifle, instinct demanding he be ready for another threat, even though the danger had passed. Crawling through the wet grass toward a distant tree line, he moved with agonizing slowness, each breath a ragged gasp. Deep gashes burned across his chest, bruises spreading across his limbs. He paused only to glance back at the fallen bear, its immense body a symbol of the violence and survival etched into the wilderness. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, Mark reached the forest's edge, where an old trapper's cabin stood, weathered and partially hidden beneath brush. He dragged himself up its splintered steps, leaving a red trail across the porch as he fumbled with the rusted latch. Inside the musty room, he collapsed on the floorboards, shivering and bleeding. Tearing strips from a dusty blanket, he bound his wounds and fought to remain conscious as dizziness swept over him. His mind clung to a single focus: survive until help came. Hours later, searchers drawn by distant gunfire and faint cries found him barely conscious inside the cabin. His clothes were soaked in blood. His face was pale with shock. They carried him out on a stretcher, boots crunching over frozen ground past the massive carcass lying still by the riverbank, its thick fur stiffening in the cold air. Investigators counted 15 spent shell casings and numerous entry wounds across the bear's body, evidence that only a relentless barrage had brought down the already wounded, enraged predator. Mark's story spread quickly through the village, a brutal reminder of the raw power these creatures possess and how thin the line is between predator and prey. Though he would recover from his injuries, the memory of the roaring charge and desperate struggle would haunt him for years. It remained a lesson written in blood, a testament to the wild's unforgiving nature and the danger that lives just beyond the tree line. The cold night air settled heavily over the dense forests of Ussuri-Krai, where shadows stretched long beneath ancient firs and birches, and the silence of the wilderness pressed down on all who dared trespass into its heart. 8 Russian wildlife officers, each hardened by years of tracking poachers in the taiga, moved quietly through the trees as dusk gave way to darkness. Leading them was Captain Yuri Kolesnikov, a man of 50 whose thick beard and weathered face told of countless nights spent in the unforgiving Russian wilds. Behind him marched Sergei, Mikhail, Andrei, Ivan, Denis, Nikolai, Pavel, and Victor, each armed with a rifle and clad in heavy jackets against the biting cold, their boots crunching frost-coated leaves as they searched for signs of illegal traps and hidden camps. That afternoon, Yuri had chosen to set up camp near a clearing marked on an old patrol map, long believed to be a safe place to rest. Unbeknownst to him, the chart failed to reflect recent changes in wildlife patterns, especially those of the region's dominant predator. The men worked quickly, raising olive-drab tents and unpacking supplies as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the forest bathed in blue twilight. A thin plume of smoke curled upward from their fire, casting flickering shadows on weary faces as they shared a quiet meal and scanned their radios for any reports. Only static answered them, the rugged terrain cutting off all signals. Yet their confidence remained steady. Each man trusted the others, and all believed they were prepared for whatever the forest might bring. Not far from the edge of the camp, a massive bear prowled silently through the undergrowth. Scarred and seasoned from years of survival, the grizzly moved with a stealth honed by instinct and experience. Its dark eyes glinted with intelligence as it caught the unfamiliar scent of men drifting into its core territory, an area it had ruled for years. It circled the site quietly, thick muscles rolling beneath its fur, breath steaming in the cold as hunger and territorial rage simmered just beneath the surface. A nearby villager, Anatoly, had come to check his snares. Upon hearing faint radio chatter and spotting movement between the trees, he took shelter behind a fallen log. From his hidden position, he watched the officers quietly tending to their duties. His pulse quickened when he spotted a massive shadow moving low among the trees. The bear's silent approach was like a phantom gliding through the night. Frozen in fear, Anatoly realized he was too far away to intervene without drawing the beast's attention to himself. Midnight came, and one by one the officers retreated into their tents. The forest grew unnaturally still, the silence thick and heavy. Then, without warning, the bear charged into the heart of the camp with a guttural roar that shattered the night. Its first blow tore through canvas and bone, sending Sergei flying backward in a mangled heap. Chaos followed as men scrambled for their weapons, but panic and close quarters turned the camp into a deadly trap. Mikhail tried to raise his rifle, but the bear was already on him, its jaws clamping down with terrifying force. The rampage was swift and brutal. The bear tore through the camp with an unstoppable fury, its movements a blur of claws and muscle. Ivan attempted to fire, but his weapon jammed, and he was struck down before he could react. Victor managed a single shot that grazed the beast, only to be hurled into a tree by its retaliation. Radios hissed with desperate calls that would never reach anyone, their signals swallowed by the surrounding hills. Anatoly could do nothing but watch in silent horror. Each second dragged as he witnessed the nightmare unfold, the bear's attacks leaving no room for escape. He covered his mouth to stifle the sounds of grief and terror, tears freezing on his cheeks. The overturned fire sent a burst of orange flame across the clearing, casting gruesome light over the destruction. Yuri lay still with fatal injuries. Andrei was slumped lifeless against a log. Nikolai tried to crawl away before the bear dragged him back into the center of the devastation. Eventually, the forest fell silent once more. The bear stood among the wreckage, its chest heaving and fur slick with blood. After scanning for further threats, it turned and disappeared into the trees, vanishing into the darkness as silently as it had come. The clearing was left in ruins, torn gear, shredded clothing, and the bodies of the 8 men scattered like remnants of a forgotten battle. As dawn broke, pale light revealed the scale of the tragedy in cold detail. Anatoly, numb and shaking, finally emerged from hiding. The birds began to call cautiously again as he stepped through the clearing, each movement hesitant and heavy. He ran for hours through the forest, bursting into the village with pale skin and wild eyes, recounting the horrors he had witnessed in a rush of breathless words. Authorities who arrived later found the scene exactly as he described, evidence of a violent confrontation, not born of malice, but of instinct and territorial defense. Investigators traced the error back to an outdated map, realizing that a few inaccurate lines had led seasoned officers directly into danger. The tragedy cast a long shadow over the village, a stark reminder of the razor-thin line between safety and death in the wild. In the vast, indifferent forests of Russia, even the best-trained men could be undone in a single night by a predator whose rules were written in blood and silence. The late afternoon sun filtered through the towering beech and fir trees of Croatia's Dinaric Alps, casting shifting patterns across moss-covered rocks and fallen logs as 5 hikers made their way along a narrow trail beside a slow-moving river. The group, experienced trekkers in their early 30s, had spent the day navigating steep ascents and rugged descents, their legs aching, but spirits high as they neared a clearing where they planned to camp. Among them were Luka, tall and confident, often the one who pushed the group forward. Petra, calm and composed, the group's steady voice of reason. Milan, an avid nature photographer. Ivana, known for her quick reflexes. And Boris, whose humor eased the fatigue of long treks. As they stepped out from dense undergrowth, they found the river glistening in quiet motion, reflecting the deep greens and shadows of the forest. They paused to rest, dropped their packs, and splashed cold water on their faces. Milan raised his camera to capture the tranquil moment when a ripple on the far bank drew his attention. Through his lens, he saw a massive brown bear swimming across the river, its limbs moving with powerful, deliberate strokes that sent gentle waves rippling outward. The group stood silent, mesmerized by the sight of the bear's broad head and wet fur glinting in the soft light, the animal seemingly unaware of their presence. The bear reached the opposite shore and climbed partway onto a low, muddy bank covered in reeds. At that moment, Luka shifted on a slick rock. His boot slipped with a loud splash that shattered the stillness. He fell hard into the shallow water, arms flailing. The noise carried sharply across the river. The bear's head snapped up, eyes locking instantly on the disturbance. Its posture shifted in an instant, ears flattening, nostrils flaring, and muscles coiling beneath its soaked fur. Without hesitation, the bear surged forward, cutting through the remaining water with startling speed. Its massive frame erupted from the shallows in a spray of foam. Luka scrambled backward, heart pounding, but the bear closed the distance in seconds. Its paw lashed out, striking his leg just above the ankle. The claws tore through fabric and flesh with brutal precision, the wound instantly flooding with blood. Luka collapsed into the river, gasping as cold water soaked his clothes and pain exploded through his body. The others froze. Years of hiking together had taught them that sudden movement could provoke a predator's instincts. They remained still, every muscle tensed. The bear loomed over Luka, eyes bright not with rage, but with a wild mix of confusion and fear. It growled, a low, resonant sound that filled the air, while steam rose from its breath in the cooling light. The group could see the water sliding off its thick fur, claws flexing in the soft mud as it evaluated the scene. Luka lay motionless, resisting the urge to crawl away. The bear sniffed the air and lowered its head to investigate, its breath hot against Luka's damp clothing. Long seconds passed. Then, the bear's body relaxed. The tension in its shoulders eased. With a deep huff, it turned and glanced toward the woods. Its ears twitched at distant bird calls, and with one final snort, it retreated into the trees. Its massive form vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only the broken reeds and swirling water to mark its presence. As the clearing fell silent once again, Petra and Ivana moved forward cautiously, crouching low and scanning the tree line before reaching Luka. He lay pale and shaking, but conscious. They quickly examined the injury. A deep, ragged wound, bleeding freely but not life-threatening. Boris retrieved a compression bandage from his pack, while Milan kept watch, alert for any sign of the bear's return. Working swiftly, the group cleaned and wrapped the injury. With quiet determination, they fashioned a crutch from a fallen branch and helped Luca back to his feet. They knew they couldn't stay near the river. As twilight deepened, they guided Luca back to the trail, moving deliberately. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves sent a jolt through their nerves, but they kept their pace steady, resisting the pull of panic. By the time they reached a safer clearing, stars glittered cold and sharp above the dark canopy. Only then did they allow themselves to exhale, the fear that had gripped them slowly giving way to relief. The next morning, they reached a ranger station where Luca received proper treatment. Officials listened closely as the group recounted the encounter in careful detail. Wildlife experts explained the bear's actions as a defensive response to surprise. The group's decision to remain calm, they said, likely prevented a far more tragic outcome. Their composure and teamwork had transformed a terrifying moment into a rare survival story. Days later, the hikers left the Dinaric Alps changed, not just by the pain or fear, but by the powerful memory of the bear. Its raw strength, wild presence, and the suddenness with which awe can turn to danger lingered with them. In that remote corner of nature, they had come face to face with the fragile boundary that separates the safe from the savage. The midday sun shone brightly over a winding river that cut through the pine-covered foothills of Montana's wilderness. Its shimmering surface mirrored the drifting clouds and the endless blue sky overhead. Along a narrow trail hugging the riverbank, a family of 4 made their way, surrounded by the hush of nature. Thomas and Emily, both in their late 30s and seasoned hikers, familiar with the backcountry, led the way with their 2 children, 7-year-old Lucy and 5-year-old Sam. The children darted ahead now and then, their laughter ringing out as they chased each other through wildflowers, swaying gently in the summer breeze. The rush of the river offered a soothing, steady soundtrack, forming the backdrop to what the family hoped would become a treasured summer memory. After several hours of hiking, the family reached a shaded clearing beneath towering cottonwoods where the river curved softly around a gravel bar. They laid out a blanket and unpacked their lunch, settling in to enjoy the peaceful beauty of the spot. The children wandered toward the water's edge while their parents rested nearby. Lucy began skipping stones across the surface, showing Sam how to choose the flattest, smoothest rocks. Their voices rose in bursts of joy, mixing with birdsong and the murmur of the current. Beyond the clearing, however, dense brush cast deep shadows, concealing movement within the undergrowth. From their vantage point, the parents felt secure, comforted by the apparent openness of their surroundings, until, in an instant, that sense of safety unraveled. Unseen and unheard, a large male grizzly bear moved through the nearby forest no more than 30 yards away. Drawn by the lingering scent of discarded fish left by earlier anglers, it prowled with practiced stealth. Thick muscles rippled beneath its fur as it weaved between trees, alert to every shift in the air. The mingled scent of humans and food stirred a complex blend of reactions within the animal: curiosity, agitation, and a rising sense of unease as it moved closer to the source. When Lucy dipped her hand into the water to retrieve a pebble, the resulting splash carried clearly into the underbrush. The bear's head jerked up, ears pricking forward. A sudden gust of wind delivered the full scent of the family. Startled by the unexpected proximity of humans near what it may have perceived as a food source or guarded cache, the bear's demeanor changed in an instant. Driven by instinct, it reacted not with caution, but with sudden, terrifying aggression. The animal erupted from the underbrush in a blur of motion and sound. Its roar shattered the serenity as it tore across the clearing with unstoppable momentum, heading directly for the children. Thomas and Emily leapt to their feet, arms raised in a desperate attempt to scare it off, but there was no time. The bear reached Lucy and Sam within seconds. The children stood frozen, confusion clouding their faces. A massive paw struck Lucy with violent force, throwing her to the ground. In the same moment, the bear lunged at Sam, its jaws closing around his small torso in a horrifying blur of speed and power. Emily surged forward, her body moving before thought could catch up, propelled by raw desperation. Thomas hurled rocks and sticks and flailed wildly, doing anything he could to divert the bear's focus. But the animal was locked into its defensive response, acting with overwhelming force. The attack unfolded over mere seconds, but to the parents, time stretched and warped into a long, shattering nightmare. The air filled with the sound of screaming and roaring. Blood stained the gravel, and the place that had moments earlier echoed with laughter became a tableau of devastation and panic. Just as suddenly as it had appeared, the bear backed away. It paused, its massive sides heaving with exertion. After a moment's stillness, it turned and retreated into the forest, vanishing into the shadows and undergrowth without another sound. Emily collapsed beside Sam, her hands trembling violently as she tried to stop the bleeding. Thomas gathered Lucy into his arms, searching for signs of life with wide, panicked eyes. His voice cracked as he cried out for help, stumbling in circles with his phone raised, struggling to find a signal in the wilderness. Agonizing minutes passed. Then, drawn by the commotion, a group of nearby hikers arrived. They ran to the scene, assessed the situation quickly, and took action. One of them called for emergency services while the others applied first aid. Bandages were pressed against wounds, and voices murmured urgently in the background. Sam drifted in and out of consciousness. Lucy, despite their best efforts, remained still. It became quickly and heartbreakingly clear that she had succumbed to her injuries. Eventually, the distant wail of sirens pierced the stillness of the forest, growing louder until emergency teams appeared on the scene. The professionals moved quickly, taking over the care of the wounded boy and gently confirming to the parents what they already knew, but could not bring themselves to fully accept. Sam was airlifted to the nearest hospital in critical condition. Medical teams worked around the clock to stabilize him, and the community held its collective breath, waiting for news. Wildlife investigators, called in shortly after the event, conducted a thorough review. Their conclusion? The bear, likely drawn by leftover fish and surprised by the presence and movement of children, had reacted defensively rather than out of predatory intent. Rangers tracked the bear's movements and verified that it had returned to remote terrain, far from the hiking trails and posing no continued threat. Even so, the incident left deep scars, not only on the immediate family, but across the entire region. In the days that followed, memorials sprang up near the site of the attack. Visitors left flowers, handwritten notes, and small stuffed animals beside the trail. Local communities came together in grief and reflection, shaken by the reminder of how swiftly and unexpectedly nature's danger could surface. For Thomas and Emily, the loss was immeasurable. The wilderness had always been a place of healing, adventure, and connection. Now it had become the backdrop to their most painful memory. Families throughout the region held their children tighter, their weekend plans taking on new weight, their hikes now marked by vigilance and quiet caution. The river still flowed, wildflowers still bloomed, and the sky remained impossibly blue. But the shadow of that day lingered, a lasting echo of the fragility of life and the unforgiving power that can reside within even the most beautiful corners of the wild. The morning fog drifted through the towering conifers of Oregon's wilderness, muffling the distant calls of birds and filling the forest with an eerie stillness. Sarah Thompson, a seasoned solo hiker of 33, made her way along a narrow trail barely visible beneath layers of fallen needles. For her, hiking alone had always been a way to escape the pressures of city life, a chance to breathe deeply, find quiet, and reconnect with the wild. The weight of her pack rested comfortably on her back, and each steady footfall on the soft, mossy earth brought a sense of calm and freedom. After hours of weaving through dense stands of spruce and cedar, she reached a shallow creek bubbling over smooth rocks. Pale shafts of sunlight filtered through the canopy above, casting flickering patterns on the water's surface. She knelt at the edge of the stream to refill her water bottle, savoring the cool air tinged with pine and the damp scent of earth. Her thoughts drifted to past hikes in these same woods, where the most jarring encounter she could recall had involved a startled deer dashing across the trail. Never had she imagined something more dangerous would appear. But just beyond a thick stand of huckleberry bushes, a black bear was watching. Its dark eyes followed her every movement in silence. Typically wary of humans, this bear was acting differently, for a reason. Concealed nearby in the brush were its cubs. Maternal instinct and protective tension rippled through the bear's body. It perceived the lone hiker as a potential threat and was prepared to act. Sarah froze when she heard a sudden rustle in the brush. Before she could turn to fully identify the sound, the bear exploded from the foliage, accompanied by the crack of breaking branches and the thunder of charging paws. It closed the distance in seconds, an unstoppable force emerging from the shadows. The impact came like a battering ram, the full weight of the animal slamming into her side and sending her crashing into a moss-covered boulder. Pain shot through her shoulder as she scrambled to move, only to feel a massive paw trap her arm against the ground. Claws shredded the fabric of her jacket. Hot breath rushed over her face as the bear loomed above her, its snarling jaws inches away. Then came the bite. The bear's teeth clamped down on her forearm with crushing pressure. A wave of searing pain coursed through her body, and her sleeve darkened with spreading blood. Her scream rang out, echoing into the empty forest, unanswered. The weight of the bear kept her pinned, the shock threatening to pull her into unconsciousness. Desperate, she forced her eyes open and groped through the leaf litter until her fingers brushed the familiar grip of a trekking pole. With a surge of adrenaline, she gripped the pole tightly and drove it upward. The tip struck the bear's nose, causing it to grunt in surprise. She struck again, blindly jabbing the pole into the creature's face, and then once more, this time hitting its eye. The bear recoiled slightly, blinking and snarling. Fueled by sheer will, she continued to swing, her arm moving on instinct, each blow a combination of terror, pain, and determination. Finally, the bear withdrew. It stepped back several feet, foam and blood dripping from its jaws. Sarah remained still, breathing heavily, her body tense and ready to react. The bear paused, staring at her with wide, wild eyes. For a long, agonizing moment, they locked eyes across the trampled clearing. Then, with a huff and a final shake of its head, the animal turned and retreated into the forest. In moments, the sound of snapping branches faded into silence, and the shadows swallowed its form. Sarah was left alone, lying in the damp earth, her arm shredded and throbbing, her shoulder possibly dislocated. She trembled uncontrollably, blood soaking her clothing and dripping onto the moss below. Still, she had survived. She forced herself upright, one hand clutching her injured arm, the other gripping the trekking pole for balance. Every movement sent a jolt of agony through her body. Her legs shook with each attempt to stand, but she managed to remain on her feet. Leaning heavily on the pole, she began the long trek back toward the trailhead. The journey was slow and grueling. She crawled at times, dragging herself across the forest floor. At others, she stumbled forward in short bursts, focusing on the motion of her feet and the goal of survival. She left behind a trail of smeared blood across rock and moss. Every sound in the forest felt amplified. Snapping twigs, distant bird calls, the wind shifting through the canopy. All of it a potential threat. Her eyes darted constantly, scanning for movement. Yet the bear never returned. As hours passed, the sun climbed and then began its descent. By late afternoon, the golden light of sunset streamed through the trees, guiding her like a beacon. At last, the trail opened onto a wider gravel path. Relief nearly overwhelmed her as she saw the signpost ahead, proof that she was nearing the edge of the wilderness. 2 evening hikers spotted her collapsed near the entrance to the trail. Her face was streaked with blood and dirt, and she struggled to speak. They rushed to her side, providing aid and contacting emergency services. Rescuers arrived swiftly. They assessed her injuries, administered immediate care, and transported her to the nearest hospital. There, surgeons treated multiple deep lacerations, a torn ligament in her shoulder, and heavy blood loss. Her survival was credited to quick thinking, previous wilderness experience, and unyielding determination under pressure. In the weeks that followed, her story spread through hiking communities and beyond. Many were struck by how swiftly the encounter had occurred and how narrow the line had been between life and death. Wildlife officials who investigated the incident later determined that the bear had been acting in defense of its cubs rather than exhibiting predatory behavior. The area remained open but was marked with updated warnings regarding bear activity, especially during maternal season. For Sarah, the memory of that morning never faded. Though her wounds healed with time, the psychological aftermath lingered longer. The solitude she once sought in the forest now carried new weight, an awareness of just how unpredictable nature could be. Still, she did not abandon the wilderness. Over time, she returned to the trails, carrying with her a deeper respect for the creatures that called it home, and a lasting awareness of the fragility of her own place within it. Her experience served as a powerful reminder of the raw, unfiltered reality of the wild, its beauty, its danger, and the resilience demanded of those who enter its depths.